Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? And most importantly, can you guys see me? If you can, just like raise your hand or say something in the chat if that's okay. Cool. Okay, that's fine. So my name is Ashir. I'm one of the senior managers with Medic Mind. I'm also one of the lead university advisors slash consultants. I think today what I really wanted to go over was with you guys is how to sort of choose medical schools. I think you had a webinar last week, which if any of you attended, well, it was 2 weeks ago, sorry, last week we had a little bit of miscommunication. So we didn't do it on time, but this is basically an add-on to that where we're going to go through two examples of medical students with some profiles. And let's just give you a bit of a format for you guys and how to actually select these universities. And I know as well that it's not the easiest to actually go into everyone's scenario in any of these webinars, but it's more so to give you guys a bit of a format and a way of thinking as well. It's quite good. I mean, we haven't got a huge group today, which I know it's a Saturday as well. And, I can help you guys and give you some advice too. So the session may not be an hour, it might be a little bit shorter if that's fine, but we'll try and get through as much as possible. So I might pick on some of you if that's okay. And we're just going to start off with, I'm just going to give you guys a Menti code to join. So you can actually join this and you can contribute to the actual. Right, you should be able to see my screen. This is student A over here. Now, obviously, there's lots of variables that go into choosing students, but we're going to try and give you a bit of a strategic application framework to work off of. So student A over here has done his UCAT yesterday, got 2.580, got band 2. GCSEs are all 9s, done about 10 subjects. And the A levels is predicted A star AA with the A star in biology, okay? So the question I have for you guys is where do you think he should apply? And this is something where if you guys have an idea, like you've actually looked into some of the UCAT scores in the previous years or looked into the selection criteria, I want you guys to just suggest something. You can either do it on this Menti or feel free to leave it in this chat. And I'm actually going to talk to you guys about what you need to do in order to be careful with somebody from this kind of background. And again, I appreciate getting all 9s is quite rare. And some of you might be similar to this candidate, some of you might not be. But again, the main point is just how are you going to narrow things down is what's important. If you've got any questions or you want to say something, feel free to raise your hand up. I am keeping an eye of who wants to speak, and then I can just click on your name and get you guys to unmute yourselves. And you can join using this Menti code over here, by the way. If you haven't got any, I'll give you guys a minute, but if you guys haven't got any suggestions or you're unsure, then I'll just go into it. But yeah. Anyone? Okay, Sheffield and Newcastle, interesting. Bristol, Plymouth. Okay, Plymouth. Birmingham. Anybody who's put, I mean, if you're confident, feel free not to contribute if you don't want to, but whoever's put Newcastle, would you be happy to raise your hand up or something? I've just got a couple of questions for you, if that's all right. Oxbridge, fair enough. If you want to try Oxbridge, the only thing I'd be worried about is the UCAT score there. Olivia. Olivia, yeah, feel free to discuss your points here. You can unmute yourself if you click on it. Bama, I will go through graduate entry towards the end slightly. It's just that for, I think, quite a few of the students today are undergrads, but I will go through some graduate entry advice towards the end as well, okay? And I'll touch on it in a moment. Olivia, I think you raised your hand. I've clicked on ask to unmute. I'm not sure if you wanted to speak. If you don't want to, then that's fine. Oh, okay. Let me see if there's a way for me to get. Sorry, this technical stuff. Can you unmute now? Anyways, never mind. We'll go through some of these choices. So some of these are quite interesting. And somebody's put Newcastle. Now, the thing is, there are universities, the three types of universities which I tell everybody about, and the main ones are always going to be, these are the three main formats. One of them is literally going to look at your GCSE scores, look at your A levels, and then look at your UCAT, right? If you meet the GCSE and A level requirements, such as with Newcastle, and then you get above a certain threshold for the UCAT, you will be selected for an interview. Now, recent thresholds have been very high. So although Newcastle is something I might consider, it's just not on the list. I would not prioritize Newcastle. Oxbridge as well. I know there used to be BMAT, but the one concern I always have with Oxbridge, and this is something, I mean, is a bit of speculation as well, is that people with the highest UCAT grades will feel more confident. And one of the things about these applications is that, yes, although the UCAT score is not everything, it does form a huge portion for some universities. Oxbridge like to be quite holistic. This student could technically have a chance at Oxford or Cambridge, but whether they will look at those grades and think, okay, this is someone who's worth applying. And one thing to also note is Oxbridge want 2 A stars and an A. So always look at your minimum requirements as the first thing and look at the GCSE requirements before you move on to the UCAT. Now, the second type of university will not just look at the UCAT grade and just have a cutoff like Newcastle. The second type will score your GCSE. So somebody's mentioned York University over here, which is interesting. Actually, Hull and York Medical School. They have a points-based system, so that I believe they allocate 40 points to UCAT, 30 to GCSEs, and 15 to SJT. Now, there is some specific information that you can get from the universities, but one thing I'd say is just be very respectful of their time and try not to just call the admissions team. I would email them for information, yes, as you guys have like a month to decide. I know you have internal school deadlines, etc. But you can find some of the statistics for some of the universities will share with the previous years with you. And we are working on a page on our website to give you guys information on previous trends and cutoff scores we have, so we'll share that with you. In Naomi, in terms of the way that Hull York score, so the way that the thing is, there's not a clear-cut scoring system that they've said there is, but from my interpretation of on the website, well, the way that they say it, and this is again my speculation and what I think it is, and it's quite reasonable deduction, is that they say they give 40 points as per your percentile on the UCAT, right? So if you're in the top 10%, then most likely you'll get 40 out of 40, but that's not in written. That's not what they've said. You're like, if you're in the top 20%, you'll get 36 out of 40. If you go in with that thinking, you can come up with a rough score. GCSEs, they say they go ahead and score it out of 30 for your top 6. Now, whether that includes core subjects or not is not explicitly stated. But my assumption is on the language of the admissions criteria is that it says they score your top 6 GCSEs. So if your top 6, even if they're not core subjects, are all A star or 9s or 8s, the assumption would be that you're getting full marks, okay? But again, they don't clearly state that. You could ask them. I'm not sure if they'll give you a response on that. SJT, though, they only score the first 3 bands. They don't score the 4th band. So you can safely assume that if you get band 3, it's 5 out of 15. Band 2 is 10 out of 15. Band 1 is 15 out of 15. They do give points to some contextual data as well. I'd recommend reading up on that. So when you add up the points together, you'll get a point out of 85. Now, with Hull York, for example, they will look at that score again after, do your SJT score again after interview. But that score out of 85 is going to decide whether or not you get an interview. Anyways, if you get a very high score, let's say 70 plus, that seems quite safe. And there are certain ways that you can find out the previous year's cutoffs. And from my research, and again, this is something you guys should always double check, is that recently the scores have been going up, okay? But again, you want to look at that stuff when you're applying and see, okay, am I above a threshold? Am I getting 80 out of 85? If that's the case, that's fine. This is really good, a really good option for me. On my top 6 GCSEs, core subjects, not 8s or 9s, okay, that leads me a little bit away from York, right? There are some stricter universities like Birmingham, which have a very, you can find the scoring system on their website. They have a spreadsheet as well, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But that kind of system is you have to calculate the scores properly. So don't just assume that because on the admissions policy it says the average UCAT is so and so, you don't have a chance. The thing is, you have to do your research carefully and you can find this information. So do spend the time looking at how exactly they're going to score each element of your application. Okay. One thing I will note is personal statements. I see the trend is that moving away from scoring that. Now it's always at the university's discretion that they can look at that personal statement and use it as a part of the selection criteria, but it is not absolutely necessary. A lot of universities do not have a point system for the personal statement. Instead, what they do is they screen it for red flags, and they look for mitigating circumstances. Again, you can read those specific policies for this. Every university has a document, a PDF document where you can find the scoring system. Okay. Interestingly, before I move on, sorry, there's quite a few things to cover. So if I'm missing some people's questions, I'm very sorry. And Sophie, yes, I'll definitely go through some graduate medicine in a moment, and as well as options abroad towards the end, if that's okay. But I'll go towards the end. So if you want to join back, maybe like at past, but that's also fine. EPQs I'll come back to as well, Kenzie, all right? So York is an interesting one. I would put question mark around that personally, okay? St. George's again, with this particular candidate, you have on St. George's website, if you visit it now and put in UCAT historic scores, it will show you for graduates, undergraduates, and international students what their cutoff scores have been in previous years. Now, St. George's did not previously look at SGT scores. They do now. So I would say to you, please research that and see if you're consistently above the cutoff scores for every year. That is a very good indication that this is kind of a safe spot. Again, the cutoff scores you can never predict them and they can change. However, what's important is that you can never have 100% certainty with these things. But if you're safely above the last few years, it's not unreasonable to assume that you will most likely be above it again, unless you're very unlucky, right? So with this candidate, I would not feel safe applying to St. George's. And yes, I'll get back to what high UCAT score is in a moment. It can vary, by the way, Manya. If you get very high GCSEs like this candidate over here, maybe he's done fine. Somebody's mentioned Queen's Mary. I always forget this and it's a bit silly, but Queen's Mary, there's Barts, which is in London, and then there's Belfast, right? So I like using those two words. It's a little bit easier for me to remember, but Belfast is a good university to look at. And I'll show you guys why. So Belfast have just recently released their 2025 admissions policy. What you can do is literally a quick Google search like this. And what I tend to do is you want to be good with your keywords. So search Belfast 2025 admissions policy medicine. You can change literally the first area and change the year to 2024 because not all universities have released this. This next month or so is you're going to find like a huge number of students, a huge number of universities giving out this information now, okay? So Belfast came out in the last week or so, but there's a lot of stuff on here that you can find out. So you can see from this candidate who got 2,580 in my scenario, we got 4 out of 6 for the UCAT. And then if we're looking at GCSEs, they're going to score the top 9, and 9s are given a preference. So this guy's got 36 out of 36, right? And then he's got 4 points from his UCAT, so that makes 40 out of 42, right? Now look at the scores for every year before this for a threshold for interview. This candidate that I've given you guys as a scenario has got above 40, right? So this is safe to assume that this person will probably get an interview. Unless in his personal statement he's written that I want to do medicine because I want to be able to afford a Lamborghini one day, right? Obviously that will go noticed, I think, most likely will. But assuming everything else is fine, you should say it's reasonable to deduce that you will get an interview, okay? These things can change though, but 40 out of 42 is a very good score, right? Unless they get 41 as the cutoff, that's a different story, okay? Obviously, people are putting lots of universities here, and I won't get time to go through every single one. But for this candidate previously, Belfast was a good suggestion. Manchester, not so much. If you search up Manchester's previous cutoffs over the last 2 years, 3 years, it's all above 2,580, okay? Sheffield, yes, I can see why somebody's put that, but Sheffield have a strange sort of system in which they choose students on. No offense to Sheffield, and I don't want to call them strange in that way, but I mean it's not the usual that you'd expect. They have a cutoff initially. Anyone below that, I believe last year was 2440, and I'll pull it up on their website. Anyone below that will just get rejected. But then after that, the students are ranked according to the people who apply. And then they have another cutoff score. Now, the thing is, I think this candidate last year, if they applied, they would have got an interview. But one concern for me is that typically in most years, Sheffield does not have the most lenient UCAT scores. Again, this doesn't mean that if they apply this year, they won't get an interview, but here it is. You have to do a little bit of digging around and you will find these things. Typically, what you want to search is the words in Google, like when I search the Belfast admissions policy, you want to search selection process, selection criteria, scoring system. These are keywords that you can use to find this information. Try and find this information before you call the university. I'm sure they would not appreciate hundreds of students calling them. They are already very busy. So I would suggest to you guys, probably try and find the stuff that you need and make your own spreadsheet, make a little bit of a table of the universities you're considering and start to list the pros and cons, okay? So here is the minimum thresholds that we have. This is what I meant by, if you read this in all of it, basically it says you need to be above that threshold, and then after that, they will be ranked, all of the applications will be ranked according to UCAT scores, with only the highest UCAT scores will progress to the next selection, part of the selection process. And here is the ranking cut point. Last year is 2440, which is quite a surprise, to be honest. Most people would think that, that's quite low for how competitive it's become, right? There's various factors that play a part in this, okay? There are people, for example, they have spots for students who, let's say the one thing I think in the entire medical school environment is that they're trying to increase the number of spots for medical students. That could have played a role. It could have been just the people who applied to Sheffield that year were very risk averse, so the entire score was low. We can never know these things, right? But for this candidate over here who's got 2580, I would not be 100% keen on that. I would be a little bit skeptical, okay? There's Keele and Sunderland. So Keele and Sunderland use the roles and responsibilities form. As long as you're above, I believe, 2280 or the bottom 80%, and you're above band 4, you will be considered. But Keele and Sunderland do place more of their selection criteria on the basis of personal statements, as well as your work experience and your overall character, okay? I won't go into too much detail for that, but it's worth looking into if you've got a slightly lower UCAT score. They do not put as much emphasis on those, but if you can write good pieces and reflect on your skills properly, you probably have higher chances there. Those are two universities I would consider for somebody with this kind of score set, okay? And finally, we've been through two types. So one's a cutoff, one's a GCSE plus UCAT. Final one is a holistic university. There are some holistic ones here, like King's College London, right? Although the averages for a King's College candidate are quite high, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be rejected if you have a low UCAT score. You can find the lowest UCAT scores in previous years and go off the basis of that, but they do look at various things. And one thing about King's College London is then they don't have a clear-cut selection criteria, like written out like Sheffield do. Like, we're going to score this, we're going to do this. It is at the discretion of the admissions team. There are places like Leicester, Hull, York, Nottingham that have that scoring system. So the higher score you get, you can feel more confident about it. So, I might, go for those. But like, for example, Leicester, this person's getting 32 out of 32 for GCSEs, but UCAT's only scoring 25.5. So out of 64, they're getting something like 57.5, which it was above last year's, I believe. In certain years, it's been below. So it's about how risk averse you want to be as well. Plymouth, it's interesting someone's mentioned this. Other than a couple of years before this, the UCAT scores historically for this university, there is on a cutoff basis, have not been that high. So if you look at UCAT here, you can see, generally speaking, this candidate that I've given you guys a scenario of, other than these 2 years, you're absolutely fine. And one very interesting thing is that international scores were a little bit lower in 2023, when historically they tend to be higher for internationals because of the competition ratio. Like I say, there's so many people who apply to medicine, you can never tell with these things, but look at the data. list your pros and cons and think what you're standing out in, what you're not standing out in, rather than just blindly selecting, right? Because there are some universities here which I feel like Bristol is a massive no-no, because if you go on their website right now, you will see their cutoff score is quite high. I know there's other issues like, not issues, there are other criteria like contextual data and, widening participation, which for this webinar might be quite far to go into because it takes ages to discuss these things. But I would generally not look at those universities. UEA, somebody suggested that, which is a good suggestion actually. The averages have been increasing, and one thing UEA are really good at is if you search up right now the UCAT cutoff scores or the statistics, you will find a lot of data. In fact, I'll actually show you how to find it, because the whole purpose of this is not to give you guys some university choices, it's to give you how to actually choose the unis. So you can just put in UEA, UCAT statistics. The first thing that comes up for me over here is this. But generally, they have a very nice web page for this, where it's called Freedom of Information Disclosure Log, right? You guys can make requests yourself. So if there's any of you who are currently like a year before applying, or you're grads and you're not applying for this admissions entry, you can make these requests. They don't come back straight away. You can email them. It does take some time, okay? So don't rely on this, but very nicely, people have put a lot of requests through in the past, right? So if you look over here, it says 2024 entry over here for A100. And for medicine, you'll be applying to A100. Anyone who's for dentistry, the dentistry webinar is next, by the way, okay? So you'll get statistics like these, like the average for UEA was 2790. If you look at the minimum, is 2190 in band 4. Obviously, that could have also been contextual. There are disclosure logs here that you can find where it does show contextual versus non-contextual too. But again, that's something you guys are going to be doing some digging around on. So not a bad choice, okay? Slightly below average, that could be seen as a negative. So please start writing these things down and putting your pros and negatives, okay? So we've got 3 universities there that we're considering. I might need to move on quicker than this, sorry guys. But again, another university now is Kent and Medway. For this candidate, for example, like there are a few more that we can consider as well, but for the purposes of time, I'm just giving you a few examples in the way of thinking, okay? Again, what I'm going to do first of all is go on Kent and Medway's website. I'm gonna look for medicine. I'm gonna put in A100 or A101, if you're a graduate. I know some universities will classify as a different code. I'm gonna read the admissions policy carefully, okay? And I'm going to see which group. So this student is predicted grade, so pre-A level, minimum GCSE requirements. Yep, checks out fine. UCAT threshold. Oh, where's the UCAT threshold? Maybe I should look around here. Okay, it was 2470 in 2022 to 2023. Interesting. Okay. Contextualization to school average. I'll read about that in a minute. This says for 2024, so I'm going to look for 2025 actually, and just see what the UCAT cutoff is there. I appreciate not every medical school is transparent and won't give all of the sort of data there, but you can do your best to try and find it, and you will definitely find it. You just have to do a lot of digging. And over here it says it's 2500, so 2 years, that's fine. Maybe check 2023, but from memory, I know it wasn't above 2580, okay? Generally, it looks like they're around the 49th, 47th centile. It's been rising gradually. I'd look at the UCAT scores for the last 2 or 3 years and look at how much they've risen by in each year as well. If I see that they've been rising steadily and it's not a sudden jump, it's okay probably to assume I've got 80 points more than last year. Perhaps I might be fine, but for this candidate, right? But then again, it could go to 2600 and we don't know that. Now the contextualization's a bit, it's open to interpretation, I would say, okay? So basically they're comparing the applicant's attainment relative to the school's average, not necessarily which school you went to, but they look at your school's average and look at how you did it. So if this person went to a state school, which was below the national average for GCSEs, then they got all 9s, they would be like, okay, that's a really good thing to do. But then perhaps if it's somebody who goes to a private school and, it's quite normal to get all 9s there, and you got below average, that could be seen as a negative, okay? And I think they do rely on public data as well as data that they hold, okay? Now, it's not clear cut on how they choose students here, but if you are, for example, from state student, if you're a state school, like I said, it's below average for GCSEs and you did really well, that is seen as a strength for you, okay? Cool, right. We've covered that now. I'm just gonna go to some of the questions here. What would I consider a high UCAT score? Generally speaking, if you haven't done your UCAT yet, I would hope most students prepare well enough to get within the top 10%, because the higher score you have, the more options you have open for you. Again, it's not about getting the highest score. What you don't want to get nowadays is below 2,400 if you're a standard applicant with no contextual data, right? Or 2,500, I would say nowadays. That would really limit your options. Hanzala has put 2,800 in band 3. Yes, the score is high. Avoid universities that look at that discriminate band 3 and 4, basically. There are some universities that don't explicitly say band 3 is a bad thing, but they'll reject you in band 4. For example, I think Newcastle is one of them. I'm having a bit of a mind blank there. I'm fairly certain, I might be wrong, but double check that. They will reject you if you get band 4, but I don't think band 3 is a bad thing. Anyways, somebody else has asked about international students. But today I may not be able to go into international students. I'm really sorry, but international students, there's so many different countries and different qualifications, so it will vary from university to university, but generally try and get the highest UCAT score you can. Minimum age requirements for British students who've been in the UK for 2 years, will they be considered? Shreya, the thing with international students is you want to call, basically what you want to do is you want to, what I would do at least is that I would call the university and ask, because I think you have to be here at least for 3 years to be classed as a home student when applying. So you have to have address history here for 3 years. Arjun, I cannot say anything about the percentiles. They do fluctuate, but they don't change by a massive degree every year. There's a chance you'll come into the top 10%. Are the unis accepting people to do medicine doing biophysics A levels instead? Yes, there are some universities that will accept bio and physics. So biology, there are some universities that require both biology and chemistry. Then there are universities that will accept bio and another science, and some universities will accept chemistry and another science, or maths. You can see that in their admissions policies, but I won't go into that too much. Anyways, I will pause the questions for now. We'll move on to the second candidate, if that's okay, just for time purposes. Just before I go into that, I know you guys have specific questions, but if any of you are looking for very specific guidance, and I may be able to help some of you may not be able to for timing purposes, we have advisors, we have consultants that can help you with choosing universities. Generally speaking, what I would say is if you are very stuck, if you are somebody who doesn't know where to get the information from, or you want to double check, this is a very good service. Obviously, if you've got a very low UCAT score, we may not be able to help you. And same thing with GCSEs and A levels, but even if you want advice or guidance of the next steps on how to apply as a graduate or how to apply, for now, we don't really help on a one-to-one basis about alternatives outside in Europe. We are looking into that as a company, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But in this, if you need help with particular, so choosing universities, etc., we can certainly do that. So if you guys want to book this, and I will share the link in the Zoom chat, you can use this QR code. So I'm going to leave that for about a minute whilst I get the link. But use that code Uni10. Don't share it to your friends who didn't attend today, because it'd be unfair. You guys have taken the effort to come out. But yeah, anyways, you can, I'm just kidding. But you can use that code to get 10% off of any of them. Most students will just need 1 or 2 hours to discuss this stuff, so you should be fine, okay? We can help with dentistry and medicine both, and sometimes we do help for certain Oxbridge courses. Anyways, I left the link there. Let's move on to the next Oh yeah, this is for anywhere in the UK, by the way, Halima. So Scotland, Wales, England, Northern Ireland, okay? I'm going to touch on the Scottish universities in a moment. Right, so this is one that I personally quite like and it's quite fun because people assume when you get 1B, you're not going to be able to apply. Now I'm going to pick at somebody at random and see if they know this, but actually Halima, since you asked the question, are you happy to tell me, do you think this person still has a chance? And if so, just for an extra point or two, do you think they, do you know any university that might have a chance at?
Hello, yeah, I do think we have a chance. I know that I really only know about the Scottish universities, but I know that Glasgow's just changed it to four A's and a B.
Okay, good. The thing is, they do have a chance. And I'll tell you why. I know it matters on mitigating circumstances as well, but I'll show you something quite interesting. And people miss this because they think they got a B. And if it's in the third subject, which is not biology and chemistry, that's good. Okay? Yes, you won't have a choice. You're going to have to be very selective and careful about where you apply to. But that's not the point. If you are really, really keen and somebody who gets scores like this, you should be fine. And I think somebody's just put St. Andrews, except, yeah, Naomi, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but exactly, yes, you can apply. Do check the St. Andrews one. I sometimes momentarily, I try and my brain is sometimes like a wet sponge. I do remember some things, sometimes I don't, but I think she's right. But anyways, let's have a look here. So one university we have over here is applicants who are repeating or have repeated year 13 must have achieved a minimum score of BBB in the A levels. We are unable to accept equivalence. A minimum of score B must be achieved in all subjects. So this is Hull and York Medical School, but they will accept you if you get the requirements and you can do it within a 3-year period. So that's one medical school, and we've already looked at the scoring system before, right? So if you're a candidate who's very similar to this, is don't give up. There are medical schools you can apply to. Do check the requirements every year though, okay? Because some change it in certain years and some don't. And I know for people who are undergrads, sometimes it's really, really difficult to when you've got extenuating circumstances, like most of the time you're under 18, you don't know if there's anything that has affected you. Sometimes it has, but you haven't told school. If there is anything that has affected you, don't be scared to bring it up to the medical school and thinking that it's going to affect my ability to practice as a doctor. A lot of people I speak to at times, students have had some very serious circumstances which have affected their mental or physical health, but they're a little bit scared to tell medical schools at times. So if you are even if you don't have like the sufficient documented evidence as well, still do try to get what you can from school, your GP, anything really that can help because it's not inherently a bad thing. There are many such cases where very good students have had issues happen, and the way that I find it is a lot of medical schools tend to be sympathetic. So here's another one, Exeter. So over here, if you read their 2025 frequently asked questions, you'll see Exeter Medical School does not discriminate against applicants who have retaken part or all of a qualification, and they will treat you irrespective of how you apply. Okay, so that's two already, and I think somebody mentioned St Andrews. That's a third one technically for this student, right? And then there is I think Brighton, Sussex, but they changed it to BMAT recently, and I'll be perfectly honest with you guys. I haven't checked if there's still you can still apply with a B in the first subject. But anyways, let's have a look at that together, perhaps. Okay, second guys. Okay, so will you consider my application if I'm resitting A levels? Yes. BSMS will consider resit applicants. However, due to a large number of applications, we would only accept people who generally have dropped one grade. So as you can see, that's 3 now. There is a fourth as well. Just give me a second, please. Okay, no, we have the fourth in the chat. But the point is, just for timing purposes, and I'll be very quick as well. Like there are universities. I think Plymouth is one of them as well. Anyways, if I'm not going to go into too much about selecting universities for this candidate, because at this point they don't really have a choice. They do have to go with the ones that they're most likely to apply to. But really quickly, with those kind of GCSEs, that kind of UCAT score, Holyoke is looking quite promising. Exeter is also looking promising. Exeter, maybe perhaps Exeter do prefer people with more A stars. I'll come back to that in a moment at times, but in terms of the actual chances, it's still quite good with the UCAT score. Plymouth do in fact actually accept a third A level, and that can be B sometimes over here. I'm just checking. We are only able to consider A levels completed within 5 years of the start of the application, right? So A levels. Recent applicants, this is the one. Okay, if you are applying with predicted grades with a minimum ABB in first sitting, so basically you can resit, and it must take no more than 3 years, and it must be achieved in the first resit attempt. So you see how we can easily find universities. So it's very easy to assume actually, and a lot of students, sadly, they are eligible, but then they give up and then do another degree and perhaps never become doctors because they were never informed. Does happen at time to times, but what I want you guys to do, and be very careful of, is if you find yourself in this position for whatever reason next year when you get your results, don't give up with that. Okay. But in short, if this person was to apply to Holyoke, Plymouth, Exeter, and what was the fourth one? What was the fourth one? So Brighton, Sussex, they would probably get most of the interviews from my experience. Again, I can never be 100% certain, but if they do get the interviews, then it's just about being good at the interviews, right? So it's not impossible for them, okay? So I was going to go over the graduate entry stuff, and this is more of basic advice, but the same stuff applies to graduate entry, okay? There are 2 exams that you can sit for graduate entry because it depends what degree you have, whether you have certain A levels as well for certain universities. Depending on the degree, again, there's lots of variables. But please spend time doing research. You can find every one of this information that I'm telling you guys is stuff that you can find yourself too. Obviously, speaking to someone like me will just make it that I've got all the information ready, I've got experience in that. But if you spend those extra days, hours, late nights just searching the stuff up, you will find it for graduate entry as well. The thing with graduate entry is it's a lot more competitive and you do need higher scores, okay? In terms of, there's only one university that accepts a second class or a 2-2 degree. I think that's Nottingham. And there is another one as well. Some new graduate entry schools have opened. Like Worcester, for example, has 50 spots for graduate entry students, and they have typically, they would say they don't give a firm cutoff, but even around 2,500, 2,600 was fine, I think, and I'll show you guys that. But for example, if I was looking at this right now, if I was searching for myself, I would just search something like Worcester UCAT medicine, right? 3 short words. Don't try to put in a whole question, but here you don't have a hard cutoff score, for example, right? As long as you have a 2-1 or 2-2 plus masters. I'll talk about masters in a moment. Generally speaking, for most universities, you need a 2-1 or a first class degree. And if you don't have a science degree or one with enough biomedical knowledge, they'll expect you to have like GCSEs or A levels. And you might, if you don't have those, you could technically resit them. Now, one thing I want to be very clear about is some of these universities will have these cutoffs, etc. But for graduate entry, it's very, very competitive. So you will see a much higher. I think the only university which is quite lenient in my eyes for the UCAT compared to the rest is Warwick, because they have the most number of spots for graduates. And they do accept any degree from my understanding. You need above average on the UCAT, and they have some strict work experience requirements as well that requires you to have hands-on experience. And finally, I think the score itself is technically still high. So if you get a score of like 2,400, 2,500, you will be struggling. If you do get something like that, I would probably tell most of the grad students I come across to just try that up again next year. But there's no chance, there's no harm in applying that year. And if you get rejections, that's fine, right? But there's no harm in trying, but still, like, the chances will be low. If you do a master, some universities will be fine with you getting a 2-2 rather than a 2-1. So if you find yourself in that position, you could do a master's. There are universities you can fill up with that. Although, if you are like an undergrad right now and you're in school and you're finding yourself thinking about potentially in graduate entry for whatever reason, if you have good grades, you've got all 8s and 9s, or very high grades, and then you get like a poor UCAT score, but you meet the minimum requirements for quite a few universities for GCSEs and A levels, consider a gap year. This is a very, unfortunately, like you live around people who will pretend like they know everything about medical schools, and some schools are guilty of this as well. Like teachers will say, oh yeah, I was told there's no chance that I can become a doctor, right? That's not that, that one of my biology teachers said that, and that left that made me quite annoyed, and frankly I'm still very annoyed about that. But there are people who say that and pretend they know about this stuff, but the end of the day, you have a chance. So there are so many different variables. Look into that. Is what I mean to say. Don't go off of what people say to you, like gap years are, they lower your chance or something like that. Yes, there is some universities, like Plymouth said, you need to have finished your A levels 5 years before applying. So if you keep taking a gap year, then that might limit your chances of getting in. But at most, if you've got the grades, the UCAT is the only hurdle. You tend to get better at that. So there's no detriment to taking a gap year. Okay, nobody's going to look at that and say that's a bad thing, reject him because he's got a gap year. They're not going to look at that. In terms of graduate entry, I'm going to assume, like, let's say if you've done biomedical sciences and you've got 2-1, I would be expecting a student to get as close to 3,000 as possible with a band 1 or 2. That's what I consider a score that keeps your choices open, okay? With above average and verbal reasoning. In a very short answer, that's what I would say. So aim for the highest score possible for graduate entry, because for undergraduate, yes, 2,800 will be fine. And if I get somebody with 2,800 and say, can you suggest some universities to me? And they've got A-star AA and all 8s and 9s at GCSE, I'll be like, oh, this is very easy. If you come to me as a grad and you say I've got 2,600, but I've got 2-1 in biomedical sciences, it becomes a bit harder. Whereas if you say 2,800, that's like, okay, we can work with that. 3,000, perfect, you've got choices there. GAMSAT score is also quite important. Again, I'm not going to go into specific cutoffs, but for example, St. George's does not have a really, really high cutoff. I know in places like Australia, the GAMSAT scores are much higher, and same with UCAT as well. But then again, like both of these exams are not easy. One thing to note as well, the GAMSAT is valid for 2 years. So if you get a really good GAMSAT score, but you're unlucky, for example, for whatever reason, you can just reapply with that. There are some medical schools, even for undergraduate or graduate, that require this exam called CASPER, which is a situational judgment test. It's not necessarily medically related. You get video scenarios with people like cheating on exams or professional misconduct, and then they ask you what you were doing there, and you have to basically write out your responses. It's a pretty straightforward exam, and to be honest, you have to be, if you don't prepare whatsoever, some people can get through it if they've got a very nice, empathetic personality. But then if you are completely somebody who doesn't really get on with these SJT type exams, you might struggle with that. Now, I think I'm just checking if there's any other questions. So there were some questions I missed about, is it possible for Scottish students to apply to English university, or is it a challenge? So Sally, from my understanding, and I do admit this is one thing that I need to just check up on really quickly, but Scottish students are considered home students for English universities, but it's the other way around for English students applying to Scottish universities. So for Scottish students, it's not really an issue. But when English students apply to Scottish universities, there are some universities that have a lower quota or don't select as many of them for interviews. And I'll give you an example. You'll see this a lot with the other ones too. Dundee's one, and it clearly says up here, home Scottish, 625, invited for interview, 895 applicants. Rest of UK or Irish applicants, 597, 138 invited for interview. So look at the ratios, is significantly different, right? Now that could be just because of the UCAT scores, but I do feel like the Scottish universities, from statistics that I see, have a preference for Scottish students. Again, this is not something that's written, and it's just on the basis of numbers that I'm going off of, okay? I recently moved from a quintile 3 area to quintile 2. Doesn't matter how long I've lived at a certain postcode for contextual offers. I've never seen anywhere where it says how long you've lived there, but it's worth checking that, because in terms of the policy, it's very vaguely described. I think it would be a current address, but you can always just check. So somebody asks 2490 but good GCSEs. The thing I would say to that, if you've got 2490 and good GCSEs, if you've got mostly 8s and 9s, yes, you've got a chance, but there's only a few universities. Like Dundee might consider you, for example, if you look at the lowest UCAT score here is 2150. So that's just one example for you. What about English students in Welsh unis? Good question. I think the numbers I've seen in statistics very similar to what we see with English students applying to Scotland. Okay. Anyways, that's what I heard about the Welsh and the Scottish universities, and I think a part of it has got to do with perhaps, in terms of applicants, most people in England will not apply to Scotland, for example, as well. So you do also see a difference in the competition ratio. Anyways, I'm waffling there, but Naomi, so what I would say to you over there with that score is a decent score. Look into the contextual data for each medical school, see how many points you get, see if they give you like a lower threshold for some universities, and I think you should be able to do that. But also look at your GCSEs. If you're assuming your GCSEs are good, then you should be fine. Also, final thing before I go into more stuff, insight into Republic of Ireland universities. Really quick one about international medical schools. So people like to apply to Ireland. I applied to Ireland at one point, and you have to do an exam called HPAT. HPAT, I did not prepare for whatsoever, but it's I hated that exam. And I think if you guys look into it, there's just a lack of resources out there. It's a pretty tricky exam. It's very similar to the UCAT, and I had to go. You have to do it when I did it, you had to do it in person, and you had to sit on like a desk, and is incredibly stressful. But that exam combined with A levels and I think it's your GCSEs will then decide whether or not you get. At that time, I don't think there were interviews. It might have changed now, but we have tutors on our team that are at Irish medical schools that can help guide you with that stuff. If you're a UK student, I think most of the time you have to do the HPAT. I know certain countries or certain students from certain countries haven't done the HPAT, but will be considered under academics. And they back at the time had a paper method of applying. So you applied through sending documents through post and stuff. That might have changed, and it's called the CAO system, and it's online. It might be online now. When you're looking at Eastern European companies, now, medical schools, there are some that are English speaking, and generally speaking, they tend to have an admissions test. You can apply to them very last minute as well. So for example, for all of you right now who are applying this academic cycle, let's say you don't get in for whatever reason next summer, you could literally just call them up. There's multiple agencies out there. There's multiple sort of companies that will help you out with that kind of thing. We do work with a company called MedLink. Might be worth checking them out. They do offer a free consultation. I'm not super knowledgeable. All I know is that there are some exams that you have to do, but you can come back and practice in the UK. The tuition fees are lower, yes. Living costs are lower, but if you can live abroad and study medicine, you should be fine. And if you can afford it, it's a big one as well. Right. Balma, with the question that you've asked, score of 2,800, 2 years of experience, depending on the experience that you have, right? Because it needs to be hands-on for Warwick. You know, 2-1 in science degree, I think it would be worth applying. I would have taken the chances. Look at Warwick's specific requirements. Our contextual criteria, yes, it's different from one uni to another, that's correct. Naomi, as well, with your score and your GCSEs, you have some chances at some universities, especially if you're a contextual applicant. But yes, the format that I've showed you guys in terms of researching and looking at, definitely look into that stuff. I think Kieran's also asked a question. If you buy a consultation with a written report, you give the chart names all. Yeah, so if you do buy that, basically you get like an hour consultation, first of all, with somebody. After that consultation, somebody writes the discussion you've had. Some parents I know and some students will write stuff down as we're doing the session, right? But then after that, if you want somebody to give like a written report by the unis and put it down for you, that should be fine. Worcester has only 50 spots, Barma, so for, I think, a lot of the other spots go to international ones. But based on what we saw, right, I think I've closed the page or something, but it's over here somewhere. Yeah, they don't have a firm cutoff, but based on what you're telling me over here, you look like a good candidate for that. Right, gap year we've been over. Luckily somebody brought it up before. One thing I would really appreciate, guys, if you can, this stuff, as you can appreciate, takes ages for us to compile and bring together as a webinar as well. I have tried my very best to answer all of your questions, and I do apologize if there was some questions I couldn't answer, but I know there's so many things going around. But one thing I would just tell you guys is do some research. If you guys can leave us some feedback, quick bit of review. We are going to pick one student out at random and just give them a free consultation. If you can do that and just say yes in the chat, basically I can go back at the chats after this meeting and see who said yes, and just do it with the same name that you've come in with the meeting by, and we'll contact you via email. I'll send you the link as well, if that's fine, on the Zoom chat. You leave us a review, some feedback, that would be greatly appreciated. Here it is. You can also scan the QR code. I'll give you guys about 2 or 3 minutes to do that. But yeah. Whilst everyone's doing that, we will be uploading on, if you keep close on our website, we'll be putting a university comparison tool and an article up as well with the up-to-date information. That should be out by next week. So if any of you have internal school deadlines, which I know some of you have, you can change the choices. I think it's about 15 days after you submit it, but double check that. I think as long as it's before October the 15th or 16th, whenever the deadline is this year. So you should be fine. Yeah, so look out for that stuff. You can use that as a tool, but do your research. And again, I don't want you guys calling universities, because I know they'll probably be mad at me as well for sending you to call them, but try and find out as much information, send them emails. If you're very, very desperate and you can't find what you're looking for, give them a call. But everything you need to know is out there. If you need our support, you need us to help you. Like I say, we are more than happy to help, and we have quite a bit of expertise here. And like I say, there are some certain situations where if you have a very low score, or for example, you've got very low GCSE levels, we may not be able to help. So I'll just give you an example of that. If you come to us with like a score of 2,200, no mitigating circumstances, but top GCSEs and A levels, might be very hard to suggest, okay? Same goes if you've got like all, like, let's say 6s at GCSEs, and you've got A, B, C at A levels, like very low on the lower side of grades, then perhaps we may not be able to suggest anything. So the consultation may not be useful for that, but we work off any information that we sort of know from public records, okay? Cool. So we have gone through most of that. I would normally do a little bit of a comprehensive Q&A towards the end, but we are sort of in the last 5 minutes. So I think I'll take a couple more questions. If you guys want to just put it in the Zoom chat, and I'll answer the questions for you. And with the meeting video as well, guys, you will all get sent an email with the link where you can just watch the video after. Is that okay? And I think that'll be sent to you at some point in the next few days. But yeah, if you've got any questions, please let me know. Anybody still looking for the consultation or wants to book it, you can go through this QR code. You might get me for it, you might not, but we do have some 4 or 5 people who have been specifically chosen by me, trained, as well as they've got similar level of knowledge to me, who can just help with that. So if you guys do want to book that, here is the code, okay? I'll stick around for any questions, but otherwise it was very lovely meeting you all. I didn't hear too many voices, and partially my fault because I was just rambling on for quite a bit, but I hope that's been informative. Best of luck with your applications, and yeah. GAMSAT or MCAT. So Sophie, we do give advice on GAMSAT. We actually have a lot of GAMSAT tutors. For MCAT, the thing is, we have been looking at branching out. It's mostly sort of a US-based exam for medical schools, right? So if you have an undergraduate degree, which you have from the looks of it, we have got MCAT tutors. Now, in terms of advice for applying to US medical schools, as a company right now, we don't have all the information and the specialists there. It is something I'm quite passionate about. So we are looking to add to that, but at the current moment, simple answer is for MCAT, we can only give you a tutor to help prepare for it, but in terms of uni choices, not so much. In an individual basis, if the tutor wants to give you advice, that might be fine. For EPQs, Kenzie, I think EPQs is something that doesn't really a lot of medical schools do not consider, from my knowledge, but there are certain medical schools which might lower your offer if you have one. I think Lancaster is one of those universities worth looking into. Halima, yeah, so there was a previous session. What I'll do is I'll ask my colleague. You can also go into the MedicMind YouTube and you'll see the recording to the previous one. So I'll get somebody who sends the emails out to send it to you. Do universities look into research experience of applications for graduates? Yes, Bama, it will look good, especially for your interview and for your personal statement. Do get involved with that stuff. Is medical research enough to replace having not done scientific wider research? Absolutely, yeah. If you've done medical research, especially as an undergrad, that would be seen as a very, very good thing. Sally, what are mitigation circumstances that would be considered for application? There are examples on a university. If you go to any university website, you will see some examples, but some common ones that I see around is mental health, students suffering from anxiety, depression, having bereavement during their exams, falling unwell. These are all examples that you can see happen. If somebody has, I think, if you come under the Equality and Disability Act 2010, there are certain universities that will look into that too. But I think it's also, these things are quite sensitive and will go off a case by case basis. So depending on the university, they might have different outlooks on it. But if it's something that you wanted to explain, I think some universities want you to explain it in their personal statement. They actually have a mitigating circumstance procedure. You can find it on the admissions policy again. Would a late diagnosis of neurodiversity dyspraxia? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it depends on how it's affected your studies, basically, right? If it's a late diagnosis, that's fine. I mean, obviously, there are people, for example, get late diagnosis at medical school, for example, and they're doing exams, and that is considered. I know that. And then there are people, for example, who are applying. If you've got that diagnosed, it's at the university's discretion, and if it's impacted your grades at a certain point, then it could. It's at their discretion, but I imagine they will consider that, right? They say it's really hard for me to say so unless I was in an admissions team member, you know, but it's worth checking. If you have any reasons and you can find some documents to put them together, read the mitigating policy and please do follow it. Are universities particular about having good A-level grades in chemistry? To be clear, does predicted be determined? I would say please try and get an A predicted in chemistry. It makes your life so much easier. Chemistry and biology is the ones you want predicted A, just generally speaking. Unfortunately, Sophie, none of the UK universities do late entry, but what you could do is do the GAMSAT in March as a mock sitting, and if you get a very good grade, you could use that for next year. If you can't do GAMSAT now and apply. Naomi, if your research is finished afterwards, that's not a bad thing. You can put it into your personal statement. And then afterwards, when you get to the interview, you can just bring it up over there, okay? Evelyn, I may not be able to give you some advice at this moment just because it's 4 o'clock, but I would definitely ask you, one choice I would say is look into Plymouth, but the rest, please use the format that I've taught you guys today and look for the universities and keep an eye on our website too. But anyways, I'm going to cut the webinar here today. Pleasure seeing you all. It's been a great session, and I'm happy to help anytime. But yeah, hopefully I will be seeing all of you at one point as doctors, as colleagues, but when you are on the wards. But yeah, see you guys around, okay?